Good morning and welcome to Forecasting the Future. My name is Mike Blakely and I'm the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum. It would be an understatement for me to say that I don't miss being in a room with hundreds of Marin's leaders talking about our economy and engaging, but that's the times that we're in and we're all doing the best we can. For our part, we're grateful that we were able to host Forecasting the Future this year, and I want to thank a few people that helped to make that happen. First of all, let me thank Desire to Inspire Studios, a local San Rafael company that's bringing you this live stream. And second, I want to thank all of our sponsors, starting with the Marin Independent Journal, Headlands Ventures LLC, Redwood Credit Union, Dominican University, and College of Marin. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the dozens of individuals who contributed to this event. You know, this is the first time that Forecasting the Future has been free to the public, and we couldn't have done it without your financial support. As of this morning, we had over 275 people registered for this event, which is a fantastic turnout. Each year, Forecasting the Future is based on a specific theme. And this year, it was obvious the theme had to be economic recovery. The Marin County economy is unique, with characteristics that made it vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. For starters, Marin County truly is an economy of small businesses. Over 70% of our businesses have 9 employees or fewer, and most of those businesses have 5 employees or less. Many of our businesses are in the personal services sectors, like hair salons, gymnasiums, and restaurants. And those businesses were identified early on as the riskiest for spread of disease. And they're still dealing with that perception today, even though their doors are open. And finally, our workforce, and very specifically, our low-wage and low-skilled workforce, including our Black and Brown communities here in Marin County. They've been the hardest hit. Right now, we're looking at ways to help them get back to work. And it's critical that we have events like these to do that. At the same time, some of our residents have actually flourished over this past year. Those of you that own homes or stocks have actually seen the value of those assets increase against all odds. And if you own a business that sells things like bicycles or furniture, you've also seen perhaps record year of sales. Each year, Forecasting the Future focuses on a theme, and last year that theme was Marin Economic Forum's Business Retention Expansion Project. We released the findings from this report, where we looked at what businesses in Marin County need to grow. We cited challenges like workforce and hiring, like access to commercial real estate, and transportation issues. Well, guess what? 1 year into this pandemic, those issues still exist. And if we're going to talk about economic recovery, we need to think about a little bit longer term and how to make our economy a more resilient one. For example, how are we going to create more middle and high wage jobs? How are we going to attract the businesses in sectors that Marin County cares about, like climate and food? How are we going to basically get ourselves back to business? And how especially are we going to get our youth continue to have opportunities for prosperity through education and employment opportunities that will keep them here in Marin? We're going to talk about a lot of different ways of recovery today, from sharing data to policies to competitiveness factors that will allow our Marin economy to thrive in this hyper-dynamic Bay Area economy and state economy. One of the operational terms of the pandemic has been to pivot, and that's exactly what we've been able to do with our program today. But no matter the format, the Marin Economic Forum's goal is to bring high-quality research, data, and advisory to Marin residents so that we can make good decisions about our economy. I'm confident that we'll be doing that today, and I hope that you'll enjoy our program. One of the things that hasn't changed is that we're going to begin our program today with an economic forecast from the MEF Chief Economist, Dr. Rob Eiler. Dr. Eiler serves as the Dean of Extended and International Learning at Sonoma State University, and he's also been a visiting professor at Stanford University. Rob received his PhD from University of California, Davis in economics, and received a bachelor's degree in economics from the California State University at Chico. And those of you who are tuning in today, I'm sure have seen Dr. Eiler give his presentations before. He's a well-known economist and expert on the North Bay economy, and he's here to start us today. Rob, over to you. Thank you for joining us, and let's hear what you have to say.
Thanks again, Mike. Folks, thanks for coming today. I'm going to walk you relatively quickly through where we are with respect to the economy and where we may be going based on a few different forecasts that are out there. I'm also going to talk about what we're going to call the Marin recovery or economic recovery tool and some of the data we're watching more locally. But to get started, I want to talk about major themes that economists are watching here in 2021 so far. The first is what the Biden administration is going to be able to do over the next few months and the next few years with respect to continuing the fiscal stimulus packages to help out specifically our lower income groups, but really ultimately try to make investment in the macroeconomy that will then guide our recovery back through the rest of this decade, potentially. There's a lot of ideas floating around. There's a lot of debate in Congress. We will see what comes out. We should see a third fiscal stimulus package since March 2020 by the middle of this month. Next is we want to see more efficacy with respect to getting the vaccines out, getting people who want the vaccine vaccinated, and ultimately get those caseloads down. We see that Marin has moved into the red. We're expecting more counties to move into the red over the next couple of weeks. And does that mean that we're actually guiding into the spring and summer in such a way that we'll have more travel capacity, we'll have less reticence by both businesses and households to spend, and that will guide our recovery forward as well. But as Mike alluded to, one of the pieces on workforce development is our lower income workers have been hit most by the recession and will continue to probably see pressure on them based on where the largest problems in the recession have lied. So we're going to see some of those data play out over the next few minutes with respect to the industries that were most affected. And in a sense, I'm going to try to tell you what we're going to need to see to get those folks picked up and what might actually come out of the Biden administration to kind of come full circle to redistribute income from higher income groups, because we expect there to be what we think of as a so-called K-shaped recovery to a certain extent. This is the latest forecast out of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. They interview usually 40 economists who all their job is to watch the American economy and look forward about 3 years. It's very similar to the blue chip forecast if you follow the blue chip, but this is more of a direct survey. And this is the median forecast for both real gross domestic product, meaning income growth for the American economy after inflation, and then the unemployment rate over the next few quarters in the next few years. So the data are split up into groups where the first couplet is the previous quarter's forecast and the new one. So for the new forecast, you can see against the old forecast that the growth rates have gone up. A lot of that is because an additional round of fiscal stimulus hit right after the first of the year. We're also expecting a third round. And so that's going to pick up growth in the short run. And you can see that over the next few quarters here. So that's good news. Also, the labor market is expected to grow a little more quickly. So as a result of that, we should expect the unemployment rate to fall a little faster than maybe we expected 3 or 4 months ago. And you can see that reflection here with respect to how these forecasters are seeing the labor market. And generally speaking, the labor market forecasts have all been beat thus far. And economists are sort of running trying to catch up with the way the labor market has recovered. The last few months, as we'll see in a minute, have been a little slower, but generally over the next few quarters, economists see the labor market improving. And you can see by the beginning of 2022, we potentially are right around 5% unemployment again, which creeps us closer to where we were in 2018, more or less, as we were going into 2019 in the peak of the labor market. Over the next few years, growth is expected to be pretty robust and then moderate a little bit as we get in closer to 23 and 24. But all this then leads to the labor market basically getting back to where we were at the beginning of 2020 by the middle or end of 2024. And that number is creeping closer and closer in time, meaning that it's possible 2023 will see a full recovery of the American labor market. But the key is there's other forecasts you can see on the far right-hand side, the IMF, Congressional Budget Office. They're all sort of coalescing around the idea that recovery is going to continue. We're not going to double dip. But so much is predicated upon the idea that we're going to get these vaccines in people's arms. We're going to see immunity kick up, and we're going to see caseloads fall down. We do not want this fall and winter coming up in the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022 to be a repeat performance of what we just saw. That's a critical factor in terms of having a smooth recovery. Now, on the industrial side at the national level, this is the progression through the latest data. The new data come out in a couple of days for February, but through January 2021, starting in April 2020, this is the progression of the American economy. And what these data are the percentage change in jobs from 1 year previous, meaning the April data here are the percentage change from April 2019, and then unfortunately losses across the board. And you can see on the far right-hand side that bars and restaurants and hotels and motels were most hit initially, and that shadow lingers, as you're going to see in a minute, to the present day. This is as of November, and this really should suggest that as we saw time move on and we saw businesses adjust, the American economy recovered. Even in those hard-hit industries, we saw recovery. As restaurants reopened, they made so-called pivots. Changes were made to try to get people back out and get them spending, and that happened. But no, that was November. Then December came and we gave some of that recovery momentum back. In January, we saw it again. Now, why that's important is because you want smooth recovery, but because we've had this sort of following of the science where we've gone on peaks and valleys with respect to caseloads, in the most vulnerable industries have seen kind of those same peaks and valleys. And you can see that we're at kind of a valley again on the far right-hand side. Hotels, 33.4% negative means that about a third of the jobs that were there January 2020 were gone by January 2021 for hotels and motels. So that's the way to read these data, but it again suggests, because the larger numbers on that far right-hand side, those industries remain vulnerable to how the caseloads are moving up and down. Now, one graph we're going to repeat a couple of times is this one. I'm trying to show ways of comparing the Great Recession, which is really the most germane recession in terms of comparisons to the current one, to the current recession, looking at the jobs market. This first graph looks at the Great Recession and starts at November 2007 at the number equal to 100, meaning that the volume of jobs in the US equal to 100, then shows basically the percentage change progression from that date to the point where we got back to the same volume of jobs, back to the number 100. And for the American economy, it took about 76 months to go from November 2007's number down the slide during the Great Recession, then a long recovery period just to get back to square. Now, for a COVID-19's recession, this is what it looked like. So when you hear about a so-called V-shaped recovery, this picture is really the typical way of expressing why initially it looked quote unquote V-shaped. The problem is the right-hand leg of that V has now curled a little bit over the last few months because caseloads went up and businesses became reticent to hire because they knew that some social policies were going to come to slow down their potential growth. And we need that black line to creep back up toward that red dotted line, just like with the Great Recession. So if you look at the two recessions side by side, one of the things about that curl is it's likely to elongate the initial recovery momentum we had and overall the recovery process in jobs. Okay. So Mike alluded to this. One of the things that we have seen that's a bright light, and we'll come back and talk about housing, has been in the equity markets, but you've got to be in the equity markets to participate in these gains. This is the last 20 years on a monthly basis for the S&P 500, and you can see the three recessions that have happened since the year 2000, where the S&P slid down, recovered, slid down hard during the Great Recession down to that 735 number in April 2009, and then all the way up in this nice long bull market with a lot of hiccups, and then that hard V-shape change March, April, May, June, July 2020. And we've been riding up ever since. And the S&P is a little higher than that 3821 at the end of February. These data are through the end of January 2021. But the point is that we've had relatively strong equity market activity based on low interest rates. And because in the case of the S&P 500, the tech firms that really drive this index have become the centerpiece of our lives since COVID hit, just like we're doing today. So one of the things to watch for is there's going to be a lot of discussion about, are we in a bubble? Is there going to be a hard correction? Those issues are all for entertainment purposes only when you hear about them, because at the end of the day, nobody knows for sure. If we did, nobody would be in this meeting right now. But the key is to recognize why. What are the fundamental demand factors that are driving that index up? And as long as interest rates remain low and expectations of recovery are realized in actuality, the equity markets likely have pretty decent support at those relatively high levels. So that's the equity market side of the story. But there is something lingering around that has gotten a lot more news in the last few weeks, and that's inflation. So what I'm going to show you is at the end of January, the Federal Reserve in Atlanta does a survey of businesses throughout the United States, and they ask them, what do you think is going to happen 1 year from now in terms of your prices? And this is what it's looked like since 2012, just to give you kind of a short-term look at how inflation expectations are formed. So that black line is the business expectations 1 year ahead. The blue line is actually what happened. And if you'll notice, the red line is at 2%, which is basically the Federal Reserve's marker for change with respect to inflation. That black line rising up again suggests the blue line is going to start to rise. And we're already hearing about this issue affecting bond markets and potentially affecting equity markets. So one thing to watch for is not so much how we see the realization of inflation, but how businesses that set those prices for goods and services think about their cost structure and start forming changing expectations of what they see their prices are going to be 1 year ahead. 5-year forecast and 10-year forecast of inflation are very hand wavy and really deal with longer term bond markets, but the 1 year forecast is really the key to recognizing how we're going to make adjustments in the short term. So we should see a little bit more inflation pressure that comes with a lot of fiscal and monetary policy. We should have expected that. But now let's look at the local and let's say state and regional economies as the basis of what MEF has been tracking with their what we call the Marin economic recovery tool. So the first few metrics here are the core of that tool, really trying to focus on what are the major metrics that we can watch for the labor market to recover, and also think about economic and workforce development assets coming to bear to help the Marin County economy fully recover and ultimately grow. The first is to look at just some comparatives about the residents of Marin County against California, some local counties otherwise, including the San Francisco metro area. And what these are meant to do is kind of show you the percentage change looking back 1 year. So you can see this is the labor force of the people that are either unemployed or employed, but unemployed meaning looking for work actively, folks that are employed and how much that's changed, and then ultimately the unemployment rate. For the most part, which is true historically, Marin County has recovered relatively quickly, 5.5% unemployment, even in a down month, which is December. And if you do the seasonal adjustment, it kicks it a little closer to 6%, but that's still relatively strong recovery vis-a-vis where we were about 9 months ago. And the other counties in the North Bay and in the Bay Area have recovered relatively well thus far. The labor force is something to watch, and I'll come back and talk about this at the very end when I talk about the potential migration of people. But generally speaking, these labor data suggest that our region has recovered relatively well, even though the last couple of months have been tough. And we should expect the January data, when it comes out in a couple of weeks, to also look like things have flattened out a little bit. For California, I'm going to show you the same graph I showed you for the US. Here's the Great Recession recovery. It took about 56 months in California to get back to the employment level in November 2007. And that's basically when the recession also came to California in terms of the Great Recession. And here's the COVID-19 progression thus far. Very similar picture to the national level. We're going to see a very similar picture when we look at Marin. And that's because, generally speaking, COVID-19's recession hit the entire economy in a very even, similar way throughout the United States. Different places have recovered at different speeds, but the look of recovery is very similar. We need that black line to move toward the red dotted line. Here's Marin County, same picture. Marin County, just like that history has shown in all these recessions that have happened basically since 1980, did not change that much and kind of wobbled around the 100 line, meaning not a lot of change in jobs. It took a little while for it to finally catch back to the momentum we needed to get growth going. But you can see that basically it took about 36 months for the Marin County economy's residents to get back to the same volume of workers as we had in November 2007, but not an enormous amount of change. This time it's different. Hard cut, just like we saw with California and the US, and that curl again over the last couple of months. We need that black line to go up to the red line. And in fact, the percentage change in the residents of Marin that are not working is larger than the one for California for now. We will likely see that black line move a little bit more quickly toward the red once economic recovery has a lot more momentum going. Okay, let's look industrially at Marin County. Same thing we looked at the US, and you're going to see a very similar set of harmed industries. Here's April and May. This is really where the pain sat on the economy hardest. And then we started to see recovery after May, going through the summer and into fall. So this is April and May, percentage change from the previous year, just like we saw before. June, July, August, September, October, November. And let's stop there because it was in November where we kind of saw the peak of the first round of recovery. And then the December data, we gave some of that recovery back. Now, if you see a 0.0% at the very top, that means basically there was no change at all versus the previous year, meaning December 2019 to December 2020. And that was in 3 industries, which showcases, again, the resilience of the Marin County economy in terms of its residents getting their jobs or holding on to their jobs, as the case may be. Getting their jobs back is what I meant to say. But you'll notice in leisure and hospitality, the amalgam of bars, restaurants, hotels, motels, primarily, 22.8% down from the previous year, or just under one quarter, or 1 out of 4 people who had a job doesn't have one 1 year later. About 20% in other services, hair salons, nail salons, fitness centers, et cetera, 1 in 5 workers out of work. So while the Marin County economy has recovered, there are some problem industries, and those problem industries are going to have some continued problems based on just the way we're recovering. Hopefully, we will see travel come back and our ability to open up the economy in full more complete over the next 6 months. Okay, let's look regionally briefly at the same data, but this is just for December. So here's Sonoma and Marin, and we just saw these numbers for Marin, but you can see that in some cases, Marin County has recovered a little more slowly industrially than Sonoma County, done a little better in others. Here's Napa. Napa's actually done relatively well, believe it or not, because when people have traveled, they have driven to Napa and spent money but haven't stayed over. There's Solano County, looking somewhat like Napa in some ways, but not in others. And here's California, which we saw earlier as well. So this gives you a sense of how Marin has compared to its regional neighbors. The key is that, again, looking on that far right-hand side, you'll see none of those regional neighbors have really broken the spell in those specific industries that had the most harm initially. And that's something to watch going forward because most of our low-wage workers are in that spot. Okay, well, let's look at a forecast for California. If you look forward 4 years to the end of 2024, the Department of Finance puts a forecast forward that accompanies the governor's budget. This just came out a couple, well, now it's about a couple months. But this is from 2005 forward, looking at the total number of jobs in California indexed to just show the percentage change. So you can see on the far left-hand side, which I'm now going to shade, the Great Recession happened, growth in the first decade of the new millennium, down the slide in terms of the job losses, we saw that earlier, the recovery period, and then growth, all the way up to about 10.5% higher or larger volume of jobs in California than when the Great Recession began. Then a hard V-shape down, here's the recession, and then growth afterward. Most economists believe we're going to have the technical aspects of recession declared over either the fourth quarter of 2020 or the first quarter of 2021, in the sense that the technical aspects, the 2 or 3 major variables that define recession, have likely turned the corner enough to say, okay, now the recession is over and now we're in recovery only. We're not continuing in recession. But again, if you're a low-wage worker, it might feel like recession for some time. But that's the way that the Department of Finance is looking at it going forward. I'm actually on the team that helps them finalize this forecast, and that's why I'm showing this, is because I agreed with most of the assumptions here back by the end of 2024, where we started 2020. That's where the 110.0 comes in. So if you look at this progression, we are expecting recovery throughout California. It's likely to be slow and steady rather than so-called V-shaped. And you can see that wobble in the V there on the far right-hand side that's shaded. On the housing side, the forecast looks pretty good. Most housing economists believe that we're going to see a relatively robust year in 2021. For Marin County, about 6.6% growth. That's on top of about 9% growth from last year in 2020. Really strong housing market. Positive, if you're a homeowner, great. If you're not a homeowner, it's getting farther and farther away to buy a home. So when we were talking about housing crisis in 2017, 18, and 19, we're going to be talking about it again 23, 24, 25. One of the biggest things that I've been asked is, okay, we hear a lot about people running around, migrating around the country. Is there anything you can tell us that would tell me a story about where people are going? Well, unfortunately, the data are not great in tracking people real time, but we've turned to the US Post Office, believe it or not, the US Postal Service, to try to get some inkling of where people are going. Here's Marin County. So over the last 4 quarters, these are the number of people that have left the county in terms of their household has changed address according to the US Postal Service. And here's the number of people that have come to the county, again, changing their postal address to someplace in Marin County from some other place. And this is the net movement. So the net movement overall for Marin County is actually positive over the last 4 quarters to the end of, or to February 15, 2021. So these are about 2 weeks old in terms of the data, but you'll see that black line using the far right-hand axis. The overall is about 0.3% net inbound households, which is not a whole lot of change. And remember, this is households and not people. But the key is that we see people actually coming to Marin County, even with the relatively high housing prices, likely migrants out of the core Bay Area coming to a more suburban setting. So something to think about. But here's, in fact, all 58 counties in California. And you're going to see here is Marin County in that swath. But check this out. Look to the far left-hand side. Notice most of those counties are rural counties, and we expected, and Marin Economic Forum thought about this early, we expected migration toward the more suburban / rural areas of California, and a lot of those positive gains in households over the last 4 quarters are shown there. If you look at the far right-hand side, you'll see San Francisco's lost, or had, I should say, net inbound households of about negative 56.6%, which means they've gained and lost. But overall, the net change has been about 56.6% of just those changing households. With the way to interpret that, given how many households we thought were there at the beginning of 2020, is that San Francisco has lost about 15.4% of its households over the last 4 quarters. So that's a relatively large migration out, according to these data. And that's how you're getting some news stories about this sort of flight out of the San Francisco area. But again, think very deeply about what that means with respect to housing prices and people coming inbound, and how much of that depends on going back to the office to work once the social restrictions are fully lifted. Consider that. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over. Thank you so much again for having me today. And Mike, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rob. Let me use this occasion to remind our audience that each month the Marin Economic Forum hosts something called the Marin Economic Briefing, where Dr. Eiler and myself give our analysis similar to what he just did. And so I encourage everybody to tune into that. And Rob touched on something really interesting, this idea of migration, which we're going to get into a little bit later today when we start talking about the California exodus with Jim Wunderman. Now it's time to turn over to 2 of our elected officials. We're joined today by Supervisors Judy Arnold and Damon Connolly. Both supervisors have been leading something called the Marin Economic Task Force. And this is focusing on Marin's economic recovery, and it's a true public-private sector dialogue. And so they're going to talk to us a little bit today about what's happening at the county level and how we're positioning our businesses for recovery. Let me start by introducing Supervisor Judy Arnold, who will be speaking first, and then she'll turn it over to Supervisor Damon Connolly. Judy Arnold is a supervisor representing District 5 in Novato. She was elected in 2006. Prior to that, Judy served on the Novato City Council from 2003 to 2006. It was involved in many civic and nonprofit organizations. Judy lives in Novato with her husband, Bruce, and is a proud mother and grandmother. And Supervisor Damon Connolly, prior to serving to the people of Marin County's District 1 as county supervisor, Damon spent 7 years on the San Rafael City Council and was a member of the board of trustees of the Dixie School District. Let's start with Supervisor Judy Arnold. We're very happy that you're here with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and the Marin Economic Forum for hosting this annual event. Having a strong relationship between the county and the Marin Economic Forum has never been more important than this past year. The Marin Economic Forum has been instrumental in our economy vitality efforts. Damon and I share the Marin Economic Recovery Task Force, which was created and has met since the beginning of the pandemic to address the significant impact COVID-19 has had in our business community. We brought together business associations, chambers of commerce, workforce development representatives, local government, and nonprofits to immediately create a place to share information and provide impact in a timely manner. We work through the twists and the turns of local and state orders to ensure a rapid and responsible reopening of our economy. From this body, we also work to advocate at the state and federal level and identified short-term as well as long-term economic vitality strategies. While employees and local businesses had to wait for the CARES Act funding to arrive, we went to work. Early on, the county was instrumental in supporting local small business relief funds. San Rafael led the charge, and on April 14th, 2020, the Board of Supervisors passed the first small business disaster relief fund for COVID-19. A partnership with the City of San Rafael and the County of Marin and our Board of Supervisors supported matching up to $50,000 to any participating city or town. More than $250,000 for small business grants was raised and distributed to San Rafael businesses. Nevada was up next, and their small business relief fund raised and distributed over $360,000 with 2,000 for 2,000 video game company based in Nevada sponsoring the event with an incredibly generous $200,000 contribution. Other major donors donated, and 76 small businesses throughout Nevada received a grant which helped to maintain jobs and support the local economy. Additional cities and towns followed suit and created small business relief funds. Countywide, over $1.1 million was raised and distributed to local businesses. The county, through our Community Development Block Grant Program, of which I chair, received $950,000 in additional CARES Act funding, which we chose to allocate towards small business owners in Marin. The federal funds will be used to disperse $800,000 in zero interest zones and $115,000 in grants over the next few months. 53% of the small county small business fund will be targeted for businesses in or near San Rafael, 27% up to those in or near Novato, and 20% for the rest of the county. Funding distribution is tied to coronavirus infection rates throughout the county. The county's partner on the funding distribution is the Marin Economic Development Agency, called MEDA, is working with community partners to promote the program. These are just a few of the action items we've been working on in response to COVID-19. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to my colleague and economic partner, Damon Connolly, to continue to share some of our work and focus for the future. Damon, to you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Marin Economic Forum, for bringing everyone together to look towards the future. As a glass half full person, the future is a place of promise and opportunity. I want to see us come out of this pandemic better and stronger. And I believe we are well on our way in Marin. We all understand the close relationship between COVID and the economic turmoil we are dealing with today. We can look at the impact from both a public health and an economic perspective. As Judy mentioned, there are a broad range of actions we are taking to support both the health and the humanity of residents and to address our local economic needs. When we talk about our economy, we often talk about our business sectors, our job training and education systems, employment levels, and GDP. These are all important indicators of our collective economic health. At the policy level, we also think about the impact on specific communities, such as the Latinx community. Instrumental to our recovery efforts in Marin is the support provided to Canal residents affected by COVID. The Latinx community accounts for 16% of Marin County's population and 54.5% of our county's confirmed COVID-19 cases as of February 2021. In July 2020, that case rate was about 80% of cases countywide. Higher risk occupations like construction, food service, caregiving, along with crowded housing conditions, contributed to increased transmission. Persistent racial disparities in employment, income, housing, and access to health care all factored into greater susceptibility to the virus, both economically and physically. To better respond to the crisis, the county partnered with the Marin Community Foundation and the Marin Healthcare District to provide millions of dollars in COVID relief. We provided emergency rental assistance and disaster relief payments for COVID-19 positive residents. To date, we have provided $13 million in emergency rental assistance. Partnerships with the City of Santa Fe, Canal Alliance, Marin Health, and Marin Community Clinics added testing sites within walking distance of the residential portion of the Canal neighborhood. We established a free COVID testing site in the Canal with the state of California. Marin County joined with the Multicultural Center of Marin and Canal Alliance to provide culturally responsive support and services, including how to navigate care, mental health resources, and housing for COVID-19 positive residents to assist with isolation and quarantine. We recognized early that small businesses with employees earning lower wages were hard hit by COVID. We worked with Mission Economic Development Agency, or META, to set aside $900,000 in small business relief to help small businesses with low-income owners or businesses with 50% or more of employees with low income. It was apparent that there were barriers to these businesses accessing PPP or other federal or state aid. The Workforce Alliance of the North Bay, Supervisor Arnold, and I are collaborating on an Employer Advancement Retention Network, or EARN. You'll be hearing more about that. The goal is to create a stakeholder network where members enhance business vitality and talent retention through efficient and effective use of local resources. The idea is centered on offering a single point of contact where network members unable to meet a specific business need can refer a business. The single point of contact would triage, assessing the specific business need, and identify the appropriate resources in a confidential manner. Businesses need efficient ways of accessing information and resources during difficult times. I look forward to streamlining and maximizing our network of local resources for our businesses. We know these efforts, along with broader actions, are working. Last week, we progressed into the red tier, allowing for increased business capacity. We are finally moving from a COVID response to a recovery. Vaccines are being distributed. We are back in the red tier, which is good news. We are moving into the orange tier soon. The work ahead focuses on developing successful strategies that support a vibrant and healthy local economy. That means helping people get back to work or retrain while laying the groundwork for a cohesive vision for our local economy. We are hoping to have an economic vitality plan for Marin and have applied for grant funding to get that underway. There's a lot to look forward to in the months ahead as we set the stage for the rest of 2021 and the years to come. What we can all do is spend our dollars in Marin. We have worked with our task force to develop a Shop Local campaign. Our local businesses are open with safeguards in place. What businesses need most now is customers. We know that by keeping our dollars local, we can support our local small businesses and, in effect, our schools, roads, healthcare, and the essential infrastructure and services we all rely on. Thank you, and at this point, I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you so much, Supervisors Connolly and Supervisor Arnold. And let me take the opportunity to thank you for your leadership throughout this very difficult time. Clearly, as you stated, the county has made a huge effort, not only to assure public health, but also in assuring that our economy can recover. And we've got a lot to look forward to. So now we're going to turn from the county level to looking at the state level. And we've invited Assemblymember Mark Levine to be with us today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but he did prepare a video. But I'm going to introduce him anyway, although he's well known to many here in Marin. Assemblymember Mark Levine was first elected in 2012 to represent California's 10th Assembly District. serving the vibrant communities of Marin and Sonoma counties.
Good morning. I'm Assemblymember Mark Levine, and I'm proud to represent Marin and Sonoma counties in the California State Legislature. Thank you, Mike, for your invitation to participate in this morning's program. And thank you, Supervisors Arnold and Connolly, for sharing information about the county's priorities for the future. Just this past Sunday, Wendy and I celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary. It was a moment of reflection on the lives we share, the home we've made for our family, but also on how we've weathered the past 12 months since we last celebrated this milestone. I looked at my calendar. A year ago Sunday, I took a flight back and forth to Los Angeles for a day of meetings on wildfire and insurance issues. I hadn't heard of Zoom then, and I haven't been on a flight since. When we celebrated at dinner last year, we actually dined inside a restaurant and without measuring any threat of exposure to an infectious disease. This Sunday night was a little bit different. We celebrated and we dined outside, warmed by outdoor heaters. We remarked that quite a few parties ate indoors, but with distance between the tables. Everyone has their own comfort zone when it comes to the pandemic, and we will get there again. So when I sat at my desk in the state capitol this week and reflected on the year past since the COVID-19 lockdown, I saw my desk was covered in face masks, information on local COVID testing and vaccination sites, hand sanitizer, and other items that a year ago I never would have imagined. A year ago, our schools stopped, our businesses stopped, our lives stopped. No one could have anticipated the devastating economic impacts of this pandemic, the recession it caused, and the impacts it has had on families, businesses, and our overall economy. A year after the shutdown, and with vaccines being made available to thousands of Californians each day, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. Daily vaccination rates are up. New infections are down. To date, over 10 million COVID-19 vaccines have been administered in California. On Thursday, I will be voting on a plan that will incentivize eligible schools across California to reopen and offer in-classroom instruction by April 1st, something Marin County has been leading the way on. We've got amazing school leaders, staff, and teachers who have made this happen. California will be investing $2 billion to facilitate school openings and $4.6 billion to fund learning loss recovery this summer, next school year, and next summer. About $36 million of this aid will find its way home to Marin. This past week, I was proud to support an economic recovery package that will provide $2.1 billion in grants for small businesses and nonprofits impacted by the pandemic. Billions more in aid is being made available to low-wage families who've been especially impacted by the pandemic. Several billions more in federal PPP aid, which was just released, will help more small businesses stay afloat. We can thank Congressman Huffman for his leadership there. We are making progress, but more must be done. The state of California must do more to help people through this difficult time, and we must do a better job at it. I'm going to state the obvious. A lot of things did not work well in 2020. The Employment Development Department has been a disaster at getting aid to those who need it and preventing those that shouldn't from it. Conflicting and at times flat out false information from the previous presidential administration made it difficult for the state to coordinate aid to those in need. The public health crisis at San Quentin was a preventable disaster that threatened the health not just of the incarcerated people at the prison, but the staff and our neighbors and the broader community that rely on limited hospital bed capacity. I have been just as committed to holding government accountable this past year as I have been at making sure it works for everyone. And if you allow me, I'd just like to take a quick moment to thank and acknowledge my staff who have been doing the work of any number of failing state agencies. They process calls from dozens of constituents a day, and I'm grateful for their commitment to public service. We must do better. If we want to do better, it's important that we use this moment to focus on the economy we want, not just for 2021, but the economy we need for 2031. Just as we need a government that works for everyone, we need an economy that works for everyone. We saw firsthand that the economic recovery from the Great Recession was not equitable. Many families struggling to find their way in a post-recession economy are the same ones who've been hit hardest in the pandemic recession. We are fortunate that many of us who live in Marin have weathered the COVID storm surprisingly well, but we must similarly acknowledge the socioeconomic inequities that low-wage workers experienced and the real economic risk many of our business owners have experienced. Changing health and safety pronouncements, shifting tiers and regions, consumer spending and habits that were forced to change overnight. That was a lot, and we must be there for them. This year's state budget is looking better than expected, due in large part to the economic engine of the Bay Area. Just as the Bay Area pulled California out of the Great Recession, its economic might has fueled revenues for the state budget. Don't get caught up in the headlines of businesses fleeing California. There is only one California, and everyone knows it. Students still flock to our amazing universities. Business continue to be founded here. Venture capital is invested here. Fortunes are still made here. And because of this, current state revenues are at a historic high, but so are the needs of Californians. The question for us as leaders in the North Bay is, how do we harness this growth, make it more equitable, and make it more sustainable for decades to come? The Marin Economic Forum's call for an economic development agency in Marin County is an idea whose time has come. Planning our economic future is what we need to ensure we have growth that all of us can contribute toward and benefit from, while we continue to address the needs of Californians impacted by COVID-19. It hasn't made other issues any better. The threat of the climate crisis and more dangerous wildfires continue to be a major challenge in the North Bay, especially with the dry winter we just experienced. In Marin, we are fortunate that voters approved the newly formed Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority to help local jurisdictions with wildfire prevention and mitigation, but more still needs to be done. I am authoring legislation to provide homeowners with a discount on their insurance policies if a local jurisdiction has a dedicated wildfire mitigation program. I also introduced legislation to prohibit insurers from denying a property owner of insurance coverage, even in a high-risk wildfire area. Another related bill requires regional agencies to take emergency evacuation capacity and the impacts of climate change into consideration when determining future housing development. And yes, we need more housing, especially if we want to have a workforce that will be here to care for our quickly aging population. When we plan for housing, we need to consider issues like whether our streets have the capacity to allow for emergency vehicles, evacuation capacity, and where everyone goes once evacuated. We can't have a repeat of what happened in Paradise occur in another community in California. And I'm glad that many communities across our state are planning for evacuation routes in their general plans as a result of legislation I authored in 2019. Just over 8 years ago, I was elected to serve this inspiring, beautiful, and dynamic county that I am proud to call home. This past year has been the most challenging for our community during our lifetimes, but despite all the hiccups, Marin County continues to lead the state in any number of metrics, and some we hadn't considered before the pandemic: COVID testing, vaccine distribution, school reopenings. My colleagues in the legislature recognize our leadership. I have enormous gratitude for so many who have helped lead the way, including amazing public servants on the Marin Public Health and Marin Recovers teams, our first responders, our healthcare heroes, our teachers, our essential workers, our innovators and entrepreneurs. Thank you. We have stepped up in amazing ways that before this year were unimaginable. With your help and with the leadership of the Marin Economic Forum, I know that we will see the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel and rebuild an economy that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Assemblymember Mark Levine for providing us with those comments. We understand that you would have loved to have been here, but you couldn't, and we're still so grateful that you were able to participate in our program today. And I think you hit the nail on the head with many of the points that you made about our recovery, especially here in Marin County. But what you also did is you talked a little bit about California and the Bay Area economy, which sets us up perfectly for our next speaker. Many of you, like Assemblymember Levine, have probably been seeing the headlines about the California exodus. And we wanted to explore if this is something that's real or not. And so we wanted to turn to one of the leaders on this issue Jim Wunderman, who's the CEO of the Bay Area Council. The Bay Area Council and Jim Wunderman has led the public policy and advisory since 1945 and works to shape the future of the Bay Area and to keep it the most innovative and globally competitive and sustainable in the world. I'm going to go off script here for a second because I understand that previously in the program there was a little bit of a technical difficulty. And as you just saw, those things happen. So I want to thank everybody for staying involved here. We're all dealing with these new circumstances of the Zoom environment and the live stream environment like we have today. So thanks for staying with us here. What I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go straight to Jim because he can speak more eloquently than I can on this issue of the California exodus. Jim, please talk to us about this. And when you finish your remarks, I'll come back and help with some questions that our audience has asked. Thanks so much.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Mike, thank you very much for having me participate in the Economic Forum. This is it's a great event, and it's really, I think what you're doing is really important work at a very critical time, and appreciate the comments of Supervisors Connolly and Arnold and Assembly Member Levine. Marin is a great community. I had the pleasure of living there in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and ended up moving over to the East Bay, thinking some point I'll come back, and who knows, maybe I will. But I really enjoyed the years over there. It's a really special place and a really special community. So I want to thanks for including me in this conversation today. This is, we're in a time of great unknowns. We're still very much, although we're seeing a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines and reduction in the transmission rate and fatalities from COVID-19. We don't really know exactly what's ahead of us with the disease, and with the dust still very much in the air. It's a little bit unclear, maybe a lot unclear as to what's happening exactly in the economy. And a lot of things have happened. A lot of things were taking place before the pandemic hit, where we were really concerned about, even though our economy was really strong, there were tremendous gaps between haves and have-nots that were frustrating people. Folks in the Bay Area were feeling we're not headed in the right direction, even though the economy was strong. A lot of deep concerns about housing, as we all know, about transportation, congestion, and the future, cost of living, driving a lot of people's concerns about how they can keep their families together at this kind of price point. So we then went into the pandemic, and that really changed everything. As Assemblymember Levine said, suddenly we were operating in a remote environment, and thank goodness for Zoom and the other programs that allow us to kind of continue. And it's really helped our economy in a number of the areas keep going. But it's changed our lives dramatically, and what the future exactly holds for how we'll do this in the future is a matter of important discussion and debate. Not long after the pandemic hit, the wildfires hit, and suddenly here in Northern California, where we, one of the great things about life here is, how we're able to experience the environment and enjoy recreation. We're stuck inside our homes looking at these horrible skies, unable to breathe the air, and kind of really wondering. And it's not the first time that it's happened, but in the last summer, I think we had 5 of the 6 worst wildfires in California history burning at the same time. So, really a big change that's happening, result of climate change, and something we're going to have to address. So a lot of unknowns, a lot of concerns, and we are seeing problems out there. And I appreciate the positivity that Assemblymember Levine put forward on, about the exodus and so forth. But I think we're a little bit more concerned perhaps than he is, and I might differ from him to a degree. I think this is a tremendously great state. We have so much to offer, but I think from a policy standpoint, we're kind of tying our hands behind our back when it comes to the future of the economy. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is try to actually function in a technological standpoint. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if this works. This is a talk about California's business climate, and an effort that we're leading at the Bay Area Council that's a statewide effort on issues around the business climate and jobs. So the stories about the exodus and companies leaving are, it's not something you see every few weeks. It's almost every few days there's a new announcement by a company that a headquarters is moving, or they're moving a division somewhere, or the leaders of the company have left the state, and so forth. And so this seems to be the trend that we're in. We're not hearing stories of companies coming from other states here. We're basically seeing the stories of California companies leaving, and it tends to be centered in the Bay Area. This is the unemployment rate of our state compared to other states. So we are the third highest unemployment in the nation, and that's probably not a really happy place to be. Certainly, we did more, I think, in California to shut down the economy to get ahead of the pandemic, and that was mostly, I think, a good thing, although we had some mixed results with it. Unemployment rates, you can see on the right-hand side around the state that the Central Valley and Southern California have had the highest unemployment, but we've been creeping up lately. It'll be interesting to see the January numbers. Here, this is probably not news to anyone. You can see this by sectors, leisure and hospitality really hard hit, and then it kind of goes from there. But over 300,000 jobs in the Bay Area alone, well over 1 million jobs in the state. And we're back to 2015, 2016 job levels in California. Since I'm talking to folks from Marin, I just thought I'd cover Marin with the hit has been a little bit harder in your county than it has been in the region overall. And you can see the numbers, and they're fairly well dispersed throughout the various sectors. But again, of course, leisure and hospitality leading the way. Our region actually trails the state in terms of the percentage of jobs that have been recovered, as you can see, and our state deeply trails the rest of the country. So California is not doing well when it comes to recovery compared to the rest of America. This is a slide that takes us back a generation. And if you look to the right hand of the slide, what you see is that, the little hook at the end shows the Bay Area trailing California, trailing the US in terms of employment growth, job recovery. But it's the left hand of the slide that I would ask you to turn your attention to. That big gaping hole is the dot-com bust and the recovery from the bust. And you can see it took us a full decade to recover from the dot-com bust. So some folks will say, well, we lose jobs, they'll come back quickly. Sometimes they come back kind of quickly, but typically they don't. This economy tends to come back more slowly. When I took the job at the Bay Area Council was 2004. You could see we were sort of in the pit of it at that point. And then, we spent years talking about how, if the economy would recover, what we could do about it. We lost over 400,000 jobs in the dot-com bust. That was enough to take the state of California into a recession. Actually, the rest of the state gained jobs during that 2000 to 2003 period, but the Bay Area was enough to take the state into recession. So as Assemblymember Levine said, the Bay Area's economy is strong enough to keep the state strong fiscally when things are going well, but when things aren't going well, we're also strong enough to take the state into a recession. This is the wild card, is remote work. So this is something we never saw before. And when Mark Levine said, I never heard of Zoom, a lot of people hadn't, or certainly hadn't used it. So we did a study at the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute, our think tank, to just check on the nature of the jobs that we have here in the Bay Area and in other places, to see how many jobs are actually jobs that can be done remotely. And what we found was we're really off the chart when it comes to those kinds of jobs where people can work from home. In San Francisco and Santa Clara counties, where a lot of the jobs are, over 50%. In Marin County, it's closer to 40%. And around the country, it tends to drop down to where you see Napa and Solano County. In a lot of places, it's 25, 30%. So we have the potential to have major shifts in where people work, where people live, how they go about doing their jobs from this. And companies are actively thinking about, are we going to get people back, how we're going to get people back to work? Are we going to let them work from home all the time, or part of the time, or none of the time? This is a constant conversation. We'll get back to that. This is what's happened in our economy lately when it comes to rent for an apartment. And so you can see San Francisco with the greatest drop in rents in the entire country. Now, some people would say, well, that's a good thing. The rents were way too high, and they're still high. And that's true. But it's not necessarily a good trend when it comes to how your economy is functioning. And you can see Oakland and San Jose kind of close by, also in areas where we've seen large drops in rent. Other parts of the Bay Area have actually held a little steadier, and we know that prices of homes in most places in the Bay Area have actually risen. In the debate around the exodus of people from California, there was a story in the Chronicle that people actually aren't really leaving the state. It really shouldn't be a debate. If you go back 3 years, you can see this trend, is that in 2018, there was a net loss of population. This is through postal changes of address of about 100,000. It increased to over 120,000 a year later, and over 200,000 in 2020. So people, in fact, are leaving California. And in fact, we were expected for 2020, when the final numbers are in, we're expected for the first time in history to actually have a loss of population in California. And some people would say, well, don't we have enough people already? I think when you stop growing and you start shrinking, if you think about regions around the country where population loss has occurred, I think it's something to be pretty concerned about. So, these are some companies. There are certainly others, and there's ones you don't read about because they actually haven't left. They're just not growing here. They're engaging their growth in other states. Or they're shifting divisions, and they don't want to really make the news on it. They're doing it in piecemeal. These are ones where a company actually made an announcement and said, "Hey, we're out of here." In some cases, the whole company actually is moving. In other cases, its headquarters and so forth. But if this was one or two of these, I'd say okay, it can happen. But the fact that this is happening and happening and happening, I think it's very, very alarming. And beyond what's on this screen, the nature of my job at the Bay Area Council, where we have 350 members in every sector, and I talk to, for example, the heads of the big four accounting consulting firms, other major consulting firms, the big law firms, the big commercial real estate firms. And they tell me that they have whole new business lines, not ones they really want to have, helping companies, helping their clients figure out their California strategy, not for growing in California, but how they shift out, and what the tax issues are, and the risks, and what the opportunities would be. This tells you the story of the jobs in finance and professional services and information, and you can see. In San Francisco, there's a 2.6% loss of those jobs. Those losses are bigger in some other cities, but there are gainers as well in some other cities. So, on an overall shift, in fact, we're losing our share of those highly paid types of jobs where they're kind of the bulwark of our economy. Assemblymember Levine mentioned venture capital investment. Over the years, we've really had a strong position in this. We still do. But if you take a look where that little egg-shaped diagram is, for the first time, we're actually down to around a third of U.S. investment in venture capital coming into the Bay Area, where we were up around 45-50% for many, many, many years. So, and that's, what is the trend on that? Is that going to continue to drop? Because that's such an important part. The startup economy has really been what differentiates the Bay Area economy from everywhere else. This gets back to the issue of workforce and how we will work in the future. And you can see only about a quarter of the companies are saying, when polled, are saying we're going to have like a central office and everyone's going to work in that office. Many more companies, sort of split and even, are either going to use a hub and spoke model or a fully decentralized model, the latter being, hey, if you work for our company, you can work anywhere you want. Home can be where you want your home to be, and your office is going to be in front of your laptop. And so you have choices. We want you to work for the company. We don't want to constrain you as to where you want to work. And we think as a company, we can function that way. This shows you what's happened in housing has been one of the really big drivers of our problems, the cost of housing. And we have said for as long as anyone's willing to listen, it's been a supply-driven issue. And sure enough, as you look to the left, you can see for about 40 years, California built a lot of housing on a consistent basis, and then it really dropped off. And you can see to the right side in the last decade or so, we're just not producing the housing. And Governor Newsom has spoken about this, about the urgency, dedicated his whole State of the State speech to it last year. But it's going to take more than a speech. It's going to take a lot of action on the part of many to change the way we handle housing in our state, or we can't really expect to see this get much better. And of course, the homeless problem grows out of the lack of housing. The folks at the bottom end economically end up on the street. That's what our studies have shown. Most of the homeless people are people who used to have an apartment or a house, and they couldn't maintain it. Since we're in Marin County, I can't help myself but share with you. Marin has been a real challenge in the Bay Area and in the state in terms of building housing. It's tremendous resistance in your county. You can see some of those numbers. The requirements on Marin haven't been great, and nor have they been met. You can see in 2018, only 100 units of housing produced in the whole county, and we point out 1,500 babies were born at Marin General. So where are those babies going to live? Probably not in Marin. This gets into the issue of taxation. California is without question, is a really high business tax state, and we're at the top of the food chain when it comes to how we tax people on personal income at 13.3%. A whole number of states that are in gray: Texas, Nevada, Washington, Florida, they have no income tax at all. So that's a big hole. And when the federal government said you can no longer deduct your state taxes from your federal taxes, that materially increased the impact of that tax. On our corporate tax rates, we're not the highest in the country, but we're in the top. We're in the top quartile there. So, we don't think there's a whole lot of ways to increase taxes on corporations that will help or do anything else but continue to send the signal to many companies and individuals that they should consider alternatives, which we see people doing. This gets to the point of just how dependent the state is on the income tax from California. So you could from the Bay Area. The Bay Area, I have a feeling this number's higher in this particular year, but 42% of back in 2018 of all income taxes collected in the state came out of the Bay Area, which has a population of about 20% of the state, 42% of the tax. LA, which is a bigger region, 35%, and then it really drops down from there. So, my message to state government leaders is focus on the Bay Area and focus on LA, and or don't do it at tremendous peril. And if there's any question about the state's spending and the need for there's constant proposals to raise taxes. Take a look at the state budget, rising and rising and rising with a 6.6% CAGR over the last decade, during a time of probably 3.5% or so of GDP growth. So, I think there comes a moment when the thing to do is to really look at how are we spending this money? Where did this money go? Are they the highest and biggest priorities? How did we spend so much money and still have homeless people all over our streets in all of our major cities, I think is a big question. So this is the closing slide, and basically talks about the initiative. We have over 50, probably 60 organizations throughout the state, regional groups like the Bay Area, like our own, as well as some statewide trade associations who've come together to say, okay, enough's enough. We really need to do something about this that's different and powerful, to get business back to the table, where businesses' views and the impacts to business are considered when state policy issues are being discussed, especially the ones that directly affect business the most. We need to take a look at this tax structure, which is a boom and bust cycle structure. When we're about 75% dependent on the income tax for the general fund. So yeah, when the stock market goes up to 31,000 on the Dow, there's a lot of IPOs. You bring in a lot of money. Amazing that we have a huge surplus in a pandemic. But we've all seen what happens when the opposite situation has, and the massive fiscal deficits that occur with even a modest shift in the public markets. We need it's great to see Marin focusing on economic development. That should happen at the local level. It should happen at the regional scale, and the state needs to be an active, supportive partner to you on making sure that the things you do line up and get supported by them. The regulatory issues are enormous and constant. Laws being passed, rules being put forward, one after the next. We certainly get that the government wants to protect people, consumers, workers, and so forth. But adding on and on and on has, we think, created an environment in which it's just a lot easier and faster to get things done, certainly to get things built in other places. And finally, homelessness. We have 50% of the unsheltered homeless in the country are in California, and a big chunk of them are in the Bay Area. And housing affordability, in a remote work environment, there's a lot of folks who are going to be saying, I have a family. It's time for me to get, for us to have a better living, a more affordable living situation. I can still hold on to my job. So that is basically what I wanted to share with you. I'll try to figure out how to get out of this. I think I figured out how to get out of it. And that's it. So I'd be happy to take any comments or questions in the time that we have. Again, thanks, Mike, for having me
when I'm on,
and hope that's helpful.
Jim, thanks so much for that presentation. Boy, what a ton of amount of information to unpack there. Let me use the occasion to notify all our participants that your presentation has already been emailed to them. So for our audience, check your inbox and you can have access to all that great data that Jim just presented. Where to start in everything that you said, Jim. One thing for me is a couple of years ago, I had a chance to be at the California Economic Summit, and Governor Newsom at the time, when addressing the audience, was quite bullish about this idea of other states coming here to poach our businesses. And here we are 2 years later, and it seems to really be happening. I'm curious, what's the response from the governor in Sacramento to this? Are we raising alarm bells that they're not seeing, or what are you hearing from that side of things?
Well, I think the governor is dealing with, a massive pandemic. I mean, he probably wasn't expecting to be dealing with the biggest wildfires in the state's history. So, when the alarm bells have gone off, I think they've been more urgent. Now how do you get the kids back in schools? So the governor's been busy. I think that there's mixed statements that come out of Sacramento about the condition of the state, and it's pretty obvious as companies are leaving that's something to be concerned about. But there's been economic good news on the fact that we've had a number of IPOs, and we've had some CEOs saying we'll stick it out. And so I think at this point it's a little bit unclear where the state stands on this. Now, we had a meeting with the legislative caucus of the Bay Area a few weeks ago about this, and expressed our concerns. We like our caucus. We think it's great that a group of folks are focused on the Bay Area. Obviously, Governor Newsom is from the Bay Area, but they're going to need to do more. And I think that the legislature and the administration need to become a little bit more alarmed and a little bit more strategic and a little more expressive about the benefits of California, promoting the state, talking to the leaders of business about their problems, hearing what's on their minds, and sending out a message that we're here to help. And then, the tough stuff is being willing to change some of these policies, regulations, perhaps tax, at least send a message out. And the governor did this. He said, we're not going to raise taxes. We're not into that, which I think is helpful. But I think it's going to take more, or we're going to continue to see more companies announce these kinds of decisions. And, the more that the companies announce that they're leaving, it puts pressure on the other companies whose boards and leaders say, well, what about us? We'd be left behind in a higher cost structure in a more difficult business environment. So California has tremendous advantages. They need to be promoted. You also have to recognize, like in any business, you have to recognize your competitive disadvantages and address those things, or you could get hurt. And we've seen it happen in regions around the country.
Exactly. And it's such an important point to talk about this, because here in Marin, we obviously don't have a ton of corporate headquarters, but we have a lot of residents that work for those companies. And so they need to be concerned about their future livelihoods with these major Bay Area employers as well. I want to finish things and try to look at a little more positive light. The theme here is about economic recovery. And we are, as previous speakers have said, starting to turn the corner in many different facets. Where do you see the opportunities for the Bay Area coming out of this? I mean, obviously we see things like the tech sector thriving throughout this. We were able, as you said, to shift to remote work environment pretty easily. What do we have to look forward to coming out of this?
Yeah, look, I think that there's still a tremendous base of leading economic engines in the Bay Area. A really big one that's growing fast is biotech and life science and that related industry. There's tremendous investment and commitment to that's going on. I think there's still a lot of venture capital that's essentially here that we can build on. There's a lot of young companies that are here that I think will in fact stay and try to grow here. I think that in a remote work environment, if that's where we're going, that's a huge monumental shift. It might be the biggest shift we've seen in well over a century. So I wouldn't underestimate the potential impact. And right now, a big concern is San Francisco, where a lot of people from Marin County work. Because if you go to San Francisco right now, there's not a lot of people feel like going. It's pretty boarded up, kind of ghost townish. What will happen after the pandemic remains to be seen. But on a good day, the Bay Area is a phenomenal place to be a remote worker. So on the one side, someone who works for a Bay Area company can move back home to wherever around the country, let's say they came from, and that's perhaps a disadvantage to us because they take their portion of the economy with them. But people who work for other companies around the country or around the world can come to the Bay Area and do their remote work here. And that's an opportunity for us. And, who wouldn't want to live in the Bay Area and have their lifestyle here? There's a lot of people who are listening to this right now who didn't start out in the Bay Area. They came here. It's a unique place in that regard because it has attributes that are, unequaled around this country. It's an iconic, beautiful place. But we do have to address some of these issues: the cost of living, the quality of life, the homelessness issue. I think those things, if you address those reasonably, we're never going to be a cheap alternative. I don't think we're trying to be that, but I think we can do very, very well, and I think we will. And I think it's just time for us to get together, focus on these things, and come up with solutions and execute.
Well said, Jim. And I want to take the occasion to thank you for joining us today, and to thank the Bay Area Council, including the Research Institute there, putting out some really great data on economic recovery. You said it well. We're poised well in the future. This is a great place to be. I think that holds very true for Marin County as well. So again, thank you for joining us. And we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up our program. So let me thank all of you for participating today. And as I said, technical difficulties are not beyond all of us. And so I apologize if you lost any audio or video feeds today, but do know that a recording of this will be available to all of you. It will be emailed. All of the data that we share today will be available. And I do want to remind everybody to tune in to the Marin Economic Briefings, which are a monthly presentation, sort of a mini forecast in the future, if you will. That also is available to everybody who subscribes to MEF newsletters at our website, www.marineconomicforum.org. So I want to take one last opportunity to thank everybody who participated today, especially our speakers. We talked about economic recovery at the state level, at the county level. We zoomed in a little bit on the Bay Area and what our challenges and opportunities are there. And all we can do is continue to stay safe, stay positive, and continue to get to reopening business and back to normal and start thinking about a positive economic future for Marin County. So with that, again, I'm Mike Blakely, the CEO of Marin Economic Forum. Thanks so much for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day.